E te tā, tēnā koutou, kua hui mai nei I rongo I te karanga o te kaupapa I muri a tātou, nā mihi nui ki a koutou I tēnei rā. Nau mai, haere mai. To those that have travelled from near and from far away as Paris and Vancouver, for this very important kaupapa in front of us this evening from our New Zealand National Commission for UNESCO, welcome everyone here today. Ka rere atu aku mihi ki te mana whenua. He mihi hau tūpū tēnei ki a koutou. I ngā mana, I ngā reo, I ngā karangatanga maha, kei te mihi, kei te mihi, kei te mihi. I acknowledge our Māori leaders and our Māori community from this area. I also acknowledge our distinguished guests, our minister, our leaders, and to you, our whānau. Kia ora everyone and welcome. And I'll now pass to our chair for our UNESCO New Zealand National Commission, Liz. Kia ora, Liz. Oh, and yes, our karakia, of course. Could we please stand for our karakia? Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā tarata ki tai. Ihi aka ana te atakura, I toi hi hoka, hi hauhu. Ti hei Māori ora. Kia ora everyone. Welcome, Liz.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Gail, for leading us through that. Ko Liz Longworth aho. I'm the chair of the National Commission, New Zealand's Commission for UNESCO. It's a huge pleasure to see so many people who have come today, all of you dedicated, interested in, really committed to the future of education in New Zealand. So it's a great pleasure to see you here. And we're gathering actually to celebrate how evidence-based insights can drive transformative change in education. And a key tool for that is something called the Global Education Monitoring Reports, or GEM. And we are going to hear a lot more about that. As a former executive director at UNESCO, I can attest to the fact that the GEM reports were and still are an authoritative source for global education. They highlight the trends, the findings, they're drawn from the experience and research across 194 nations. And when I said that to Manos earlier, he said, oh, it's 208 actually, Liz. So we are truly fortunate that we can tap into this amazing resource to guide education globally. I'd like to acknowledge our distinguished speakers. It's an absolute honour to have with us today the Minister of Education, the Honourable Erica Stanford. Thank you so much, Minister, for making time and joining us today. We're thrilled that you're here. Also, all the way from Paris, the Director of the GEM report, Manos Antoninis. Welcome, Manos. I think it's your first trip down under, or certainly down here anyway. We also, of course, have our New Zealand National Commission Education Commissioner, Professor Gail Gillon, who you just heard from, and the President of the Commonwealth of Learning, Professor Peter Scott. Also very welcome to you all, and a huge thank you for the insights that you're about to share with us. I want to acknowledge you, the attendees. It's wonderful to be here with such a diverse and dedicated group. I mean, colleagues across government, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who provided financial support for one of the GEM reports that I hope we will talk about a bit today. The Ministry of Education, of course, the wider education sector, schools, international development community, and our commissioners from the National Commission, and of course youth representatives. So your presence here shows a shared commitment to shaping inclusive and forward-thinking education policies. So as the National Commission, as Chair, I want to just say a couple of words, more than a couple actually, a few words about the National Commission, because we're absolutely delighted to host this event. It aligns so strongly with our our mission to connect Aotearoa New Zealand to UNESCO and to the world through the fostering of ideas and sharing knowledge. And I'm particularly pleased that our focus today is going to be on education, because we all know it's education that transforms lives, but it's also education that's at the heart of UNESCO's mission to build peace, eradicate poverty, and drive sustainable development. It's a human right for all throughout our lifetimes. UNESCO, which you probably know, is the United Nations Organisation for Education, Natural Sciences, Social Sciences, Culture, Communication and Information. UNESCO provides global and regional leadership in education, focuses a lot on the education systems worldwide, and it responds to contemporary global challenges through the sharing of knowledge and education. So the work encompasses quality educational development from preschool to higher education and beyond. And I'm proud to mention that New Zealand was the second country to sign up to the UNESCO Constitution way back when, in 1946. And the first leader, actually, of the education sector in UNESCO, the ADG of Education, way back in 1946, was our own Secretary for Education in New Zealand. So New Zealand's membership underscores our long-standing commitment to the international rules-based order and global cooperation in the fields of education, culture and sciences. And today, with 194 members of UNESCO, we can see the power of international collaboration in advancing education for all. And you see that if you go look at some of the statistics through the decades on education. So we, as the Commission, we represent New Zealand to UNESCO, and we try to take the best of UNESCO's collective resources and networks and programs and connections and so on, and apply them in a way that benefits New Zealand. And we create opportunities for people to get together in events like this, whether it be through organisations, programs, initiatives, whatever level, local, national, international, and to provide a space and time to build greater understanding, to drive the desire to cooperate through the exchange of knowledge and dialogue. And you know why it's in the hopes, the aspiration is that somehow doing this we can find solutions to address common challenges and maybe build a more sustainable and peaceful world. That's the aspiration. So thank you all for coming. I have apparently some housekeeping I'm meant to do on health and safety. We appreciate very much being in this beautiful auditorium of the National Library. And if the fire alarm rings, make your way out the way you came in, out the glass doors onto Aitken Street there, to the gather and follow the staff to designated gathering point in the event of earthquake. We are in Wellington after all. Please assume the brace position by leaning forwards in your seat, placing your hands on the back of your head. And once the shaking has stopped, wait for instructions, because it may be okay or it may not be okay. So we'll find out. So we need to say these things these days, just to keep everybody safe. So let's get into introducing these GEM reports. We're here to talk about and mark the vital role of these global education monitoring reports, or GEM reports, in shaping education policy worldwide. They can serve as blueprints for action. They offer in-depth analyses and policy recommendations. They can illuminate both the challenges and the opportunities, and they remind us that innovative approaches, whether it's through technology or visionary leadership, are the key to advancing inclusive, equitable and quality education for all. So today's event's going to highlight two recent publications: the 2024 GEM report on technology and education in the Pacific region, which examines how innovative technologies are reshaping learning environments. You think about the Pacific and the tyranny of distance, it's a highly appropriate theme that they chose. And we're also going to highlight the 2024-25 GEM report on leadership in education. And this explores the critical role of dynamic leadership in fostering sustainable education reforms. So I look forward to hearing the reflections from our speakers, and we're going to try and do a little Q&A afterwards. And with that, it's my great pleasure to invite the Minister of Education, the Honourable Erica Stanford, to say a few words. And please join me in giving her a very warm welcome.
Thank you. Tēnā koutou katoa ngā mihi nui kia koutou. My name is Erica Stanford, as you found out. I'm the Minister of Education. I'm just going to set an alarm on my phone for 10 minutes because I've been given 10 minutes and politicians are well known for talking too much, and I don't want to do that. Can I just say thank you so much for the warm welcome and the invitation to speak today. Can I also welcome and acknowledge Mr. Antoninis. I'm sorry that you missed summer in Wellington. That was last week. Apologies for the hail and the overnight and the freezing weather. Can I also acknowledge the New Zealand National Commission and UNESCO for bringing us all here together to this event so we can benefit from the discussion and the important work that's been done. And I need to acknowledge in particular Chair Liz and Education Commissioner Gail Gillon and Social Sciences Commissioner Laura Black. Can I just say to Gail Gillon, if those who don't know, one of the driving factors behind a lot of policy reform in New Zealand has been because of the work of Gail around structured literacy and how the brain learns and how children learn to read. And so she is a national treasure and very useful for a lot of the work that I have done. Can I say that the GEM reports are critical to helping us improve education systems and driving the work that we do as policy makers. They're really helpful for us to identify where gaps are, where trends are, what's happening overseas. And I'm very pleased that New Zealand plays its part in this important work through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But this recent GEM report on leadership in education examines the requirements of leadership in education and how they vary between countries and over time. And interestingly, but not surprisingly, it identifies that beside the quality of the teacher, and we all know, it's no surprise to anyone, the most important thing about raising achievement is the quality of the teacher in front of the child. Almost nothing else matters. But second to that, the other thing that does matter, of course, is leadership. And it's been highlighted in this report. And that's a really important reminder for policymakers because we can so often really focus our efforts on the classroom teacher and the resourcing and the curriculum and all of the things that they need to do their job and the professional learning and development for the classroom teacher, which we are doing, and I'll talk a bit more about in a moment. But we need to make sure that we keep in our sights the role of leaders. And I know that when I walk into a school, I can tell you within 5 minutes the quality of education in that school by sitting down with the principal. That leadership role is so absolutely crucial to the outcomes of our tamariki, of our children in New Zealand and of course around the world. And so we've already in New Zealand highlighted, and I wanted to acknowledge the PPTA President Chris, who won't like me doing this, but he's sitting in the audience just here, Chris Abercrombie, who's been doing some really good work. So that's our secondary school association, union, sorry, I should say, of helping drive some of that leadership work about how do we identify who are future leaders in education, how do we invest in them, what do we invest, and then how, once they do become leaders, then what support do we need to wrap around them? And that has been highlighted very clearly by the unions and by a number of other associations that we've worked really close with to identify what are the gaps. So in New Zealand, it's been a little bit hit or miss. We really haven't focused on leadership, and we can see the outcome of that, and that we're having burnout of our principals. They are under enormous amount of pressure because they're not being well prepared, and that's on us. They're not being well prepared, and then they're not being well supported when they are a principal and in service. And that absolutely has to change because, as I say, their role in the school is so crucial. If we want to raise achievement and close the equity gap, which is all I ever talk about, we must invest in them. And so we've got a bit of a comprehensive plan going on, working with the unions and others about identifying what that pathway looks like, where the investment needs to go to get to where we need to be. But just more broadly, I want to talk about leadership sort of a level above that, because it all links in. And in New Zealand, we have a very devolved system, so every school is self-managing. So it's very hard to get, or it can be hard to get, consistency across the sector in expectations and in curriculum and what's being taught and how it's being taught. And so it is really important, if you take a layer up from principals into the Ministry of Education, indeed the Minister of Education, on how you set those expectations and those goals so we are all commonly working towards a similar outcome. And so it was really important for me coming into this role when I was in opposition 16 months ago, thinking carefully about what are the 6 key priority areas that we need to focus on to raise achievement, close the equity gap, and I'll tell you those briefly. I won't go into great detail, I don't have time, but the curriculum, pedagogy, or the way that they're teaching, assessment, making sure that we're investing in the leaders of the future in our workforce, learning support, and great data and evidence. Now, all of those things are really important, not just for me, not just for the ministry, but how that then filters down into the sector so we're all driving for the same outcomes and on the same pathway. And so having those 6 priority areas have been absolutely crucial. And we must all be on board. So one of our big reforms in New Zealand of late has been our curriculum, started by the previous government, and we've picked that up and run with it. It's so important that you have the sector buy-in, you have principal buy-in, you have teacher buy-in, and that we're all working towards the same goal. And we're all, because this will live or die on implementation. You can put a new curriculum out there, but unless it's well implemented, it's not going to be effective. And so having that very clear sense right from coming in government, we said we need a knowledge-rich curriculum. It needs to be year by year. And we need great professional learning and development around it, and we need great resourcing around it to make sure that it sticks. And really setting out those goals was so important for us, so that every principal and every teacher and every leader knew this is the goal. There is a shift in New Zealand. It's away from our multiple year, quite fluffy, devoid of any real knowledge curriculum that we've had in the past, to a much clearer, much more detailed, knowledge-rich curriculum that requires explicit teaching, that is based on the science of learning, so that we are all on the same page driving for the same thing. So we're all doing the same professional learning and development, and making sure that that is so clear from the top in our very devolved system is really important. So from my perspective as a leader, setting out our vision and our goals, and making sure that we've got all of our principles understanding what we're driving for and how we're driving for it is really important. So we've done that with curriculum, we've done it with pedagogical approaches as well, and as I mentioned, I think I may be wrong, you'll be able to tell me, I think we may be the first country in the world to mandate structured literacy as the way that we teach our children to read. And our approach to literacy in primary school as of this year. And it's through the work of Gail and others that helped us to do that. But again, we've been very clear from the top, we are following a science of learning approach based on cognitive research and science and decades of research to show us how the brain learns. Again, we've been very clear about that and sending out those messages very clearly to our principals, because they are the ones who will help us implement this. It's not going to implement it by itself, and teachers won't be able to implement this by themselves. It is through the leadership of principals that will help us to make sure the investment we're putting in at the top makes its way to the kids in the classroom for the outcomes that we need. And so principals play such a key role in that through their leadership. But it's through our clear leadership and our expectations and accountability that will drive their behaviour and making sure that we're implementing this really well. So I'm just about out of time, but I wanted to just give you a sense of the fact that we acknowledge that leadership is so extraordinarily important. We are investing and looking at investing more in our leaders because we know we've not had a good pipeline and a good pathway and good supports, but also from the top, setting those really good expectations so that we can have these initiatives really well implemented and driven into the classroom. We want 80% of our kids to be at curriculum by the time they enter high school. We are, I tell you, way off that in this country, way off that. We have a huge divide between those students who have the means, whose families are wealthier, and those families who are not. In New Zealand, really your means determine your destiny. We are trying to turn that around and close that equity gap because education should be the great equaliser, and for too long in this country it has not been. But in order to turn that around, we have to invest in our leaders, support them, and give them extraordinarily good direction from the top. So I look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. You link it beautifully to leadership and education in so many ways. In those few words, that was rich indeed, and in terms of your focus on evidence and science-based approaches, and how through the collaboration we can make this possible. Principles through their leadership being a key to success, and in a short period of time you packed it in just perfectly. Thank you. I found that really fascinating. So let's hear from our next speaker, please. Manos Antoninis, Director of the UNESCO Global Education Monitoring Report. And Manos has been leading the GEM report since 2017, and his expertise in education policy, data analysis and international development, he's got a real number of threads in his career and experience. All of that's been instrumental in ensuring that the GEM report remains a trusted and influential resource for governments, educators and policymakers. So we're extremely honoured to have Manos with us today to share his insights and reflections. So please welcome him.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Minister Stanford, the National Commission of UNESCO for organising this event, our partner, Professor Scott from the Commonwealth of Learning, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade for the support that they have started providing to the report, and for inviting me also to take part in the very interesting deliberations over the last 2 days. A quick word of introduction for the GEM report, which almost is now 25 years old, and has started as an experiment of an editorially independent report hosted and published by UNESCO to monitor progress in international education. What started as an experiment, because it had very sound foundations, survived the test of time, and in 2015 it received an official mandate to monitor progress on education in the new agenda, an agenda that has the very special characteristic of being unified, universal, and that means that since 2015 our twin mandate to monitor progress on education, going through the statistics of SDG 4, our global education goal, but also the national and international strategies to achieve it, so the implementation of these strategies, which gives the report a theme every time, has been particularly important for bringing the world together and drawing the common threads of between countries, that actually we're all in this together, and that's what we try to do, and as you will hear from me. And increasingly our board has been encouraging us to have an influence also on policy, and that's how eventually New Zealand also got to know about the reports. The 2023 report, among its many findings, as you will hear from its regional edition on technology, captured the headlines through its suggestion that the use of mobile phones in schools was counterproductive, according to the research that was emerging. And we identified that 1 in 4 countries in the world had already introduced some restrictions. By now, 40% of countries have done so, and I think the report played quite an influential role in that agenda. I'm going to present today two reports in one, and I am really stressed for having to squeeze the time, but I'll do my best. These are the themes that we have covered over the last few years, the first part of the presentation will be on leadership in education, our latest report, and then the second part will be on the regional edition of the previous cycle on technology and education in the Pacific, the partnership with the Commonwealth of Learning. So the need for strong leaders was already voiced by the Minister, and there are reasons. There are big education challenges around the world. I'll present in this slide three major challenges. The first is finding that we tend to associate with the world's poorer countries, but in fact, in the last 10 years, learning outcomes in reading and mathematics have been declining, and actually at a pace that is perhaps unprecedented. In reading, for example, since 2012, according to the OECD's PISA's statistics, the percentage of children, of young people achieving minimum proficiency declined by 12 percentage points in 10 years. This is really unprecedented. The second global challenge is the fact that since 2015, the number of children out of school has not changed at all. It remains at 250 million. That's about 1 in 6 children and young people around the world. Very, very slight decline in the rate. So major challenge, given that we all want all children to graduate from secondary school. And the third is, in the face of these challenges, unfortunately, what is happening is that spending levels are going down. The percentage of the budgets that countries allocate to education, except for low-income countries, the poorest countries in the world, in the rest of the world, in basically 85% of the countries in the world, has gone down considerably for a number of reasons. And that's, of course, a major concern if we are faced with the challenges we're facing. That calls for leadership, and it's leadership at all levels. And the report doesn't only talk about school leadership, not just the school principal. It talks about all those people in the community of the school that also get to participate and influence, teachers, students, parents, and the community. System-level officials, the civil servants in local and central governments that help implement the reforms of central government and support schools. And then the political leadership. And that's not just the minister, not just the parliamentarians, but also all those who shape the goals of society and the direction it is taking. Because at the end of the day, leadership is a process of influence to mobilize people to achieve a common goal. And in that process, we have people who have a stake in education, the students, the teachers, and the businesses, their associations, but also all those who contribute ideas, the think tanks, the academics, the researchers, us also, international organizations, but also those who help hold us to account, the media, civil society. All these people together influence the direction of education, and that really needs to be taken into account. But the report emphasizes that there's a tendency to focus on the charismatic people, those who really help. You enter the school and you see that they help transform the school, but that's not always enough guidance. And I think the minister expressed that very clearly when she said that we need to find ways in the system so the system attracts and retains and develops those people who may not be even willing to step in, because sometimes there are particular characters who tend to lead, but we need people with a wide range of qualifications and abilities to come into the profession, and that's what the report really is about. Now, what do school and system leaders do? We identified 4 essential leadership dimensions that need to be nurtured. The first is to set expectations, of course, to reflect the goals of central government, but also to bring their own perspective on how the school should be developing. The second is to retain a focus on learning, and that in many parts of the world, or in most parts of the world, has not been the case. People have been focusing on the job of the principal as an administrative position, but actually the need to focus on learning is increasingly being realized. They need to foster collaboration, because school leaders cannot do everything on their own. They have strengths and weaknesses, and where they have weaknesses, they need to bring others to support. And finally, they need to develop people. They need to develop their teams. Of course, they develop students, but they also need to develop the people they work with. And I will go straight to the recommendations, and I will go rather quickly through them. I'm not going to all the details. The first recommendation is that we need to trust and empower leaders. Leaders, of course, exercise their leadership in all contexts around the world, but we know that their influence is greater when they are trusted to use their skills. And yet, for example, let's take the example of the tertiary education sector. 40% of countries in the world do not recognize higher education institutions' autonomy in their laws. But of course, autonomy is cannot come on its own. It has to have sufficient support measures. You need to know exactly your roles. You need to have adequate, timely, and equitable resources. And there needs to be accountability for the use of the resources, but the outcomes for which you may be held to account should be feasible and should not add to the burnout and the stress. So we should be reasonable in what we expect from leaders. The second set of recommendations is about professionalizing leadership as a job. That has three components. The first is the selection. There needs to be open, competitive, and inclusive recruitment. Of course, we know in New Zealand that is the case, but it's only in 2/3 of the countries around the world. In 1/3 of the countries, there's still a lot of political interference. And of course, when you have that removes away a little bit of the authority and the prestige of the leader. But we should also remember that while school leaders are teachers, they need to be teachers, is inevitable. The best teachers do not always make the best principals, and that's something we forget. And the report identifies that only about 1/3 of countries include management experience as a prerequisite to become a leader. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in broadening the criteria. The second is a development. Unfortunately, I mentioned these 4 core dimensions, but around the world, only about 1 in 5 training programs cover all these dimensions. This perception of what a leader should do is not very, very widespread, and more development is needed. And even in rich countries, about half of principals enter the profession without any training. And only 1 in 3, or less than 1 in 3 countries have induction programs for new principals. The challenge that remains is that even when they start, many principals' time is distracted into administrative activities. In middle-income countries, more than 2/3 of their time is basically on bureaucracy. And even in high-income countries where we know that principals are better prepared, we know that over time, the demands on their time are such that the time that they allocate to supporting learning is squeezed out. And that's, of course, another cause for concern. The third is recognition. We need standards. Only half of the countries around the world have professional standards and competency frameworks for principals. And these standards are really key because they are the ways to reflect policy into practice, change perceptions about what leadership is about, and also guide selection and preparation. We should avoid the mistake to import principles standards from one country to the other. They need to reflect the local conditions. And the final recommendation is about what I mentioned earlier about sharing. Distributed leadership is a technical term. School leaders need to engage others around them, vice and assistant principals, teacher leaders, formal and informal teacher leaders, but also all the members of the community, because it is key for that. And yet, only half of those countries that do have standards recognize this collaboration as one of the key dimensions. Now, these recommendations I mentioned refer to school leaders, but also refer to system leaders, those people who, at the end of the day, carry out and implement these reforms. And their role is very important, we should not forget, because politically these ministers are under challenge and stress and pressure to do a lot of things in very short time. This graph shows that 1 and 2 ministers are already out of office within 2 years of their of coming into office, and that of course adds to the pressure. It's something that we should not forget, and that's where it happens in many countries, means that essentially reforms don't get implemented. There's a good example of how short tenures make it harder to deliver reforms. So politicians need the skills that they can collaborate, create consensus alliances, so that their reforms can be long-standing. Now, to move to the second part, just to say that the global report never comes alone. It comes with other editions that support its messages. There's a youth report on the role of youth engagement in education policy and making a legislation, and a gender report forthcoming on the role of women in education leadership. But also there are 4 regional editions that try to remind us that apart from the focus on learning, lead for learning per se, there are also other important outcomes for which we expect school leaders to support. The first is on Central and Eastern Europe on the issue of inclusion, which was published last week. The second is on the role of distributing and sharing leadership, which is key for democracy, and that's the focus on Latin America. The third, that will make the bridge for the second part, is on leadership and digital transformation. We will focus on East Asia with case studies on China, Korea, and Japan, and Mongolia. And then the fourth is very close to the heart of the reform that you implement. We will be looking at Africa and the role of school leaders for instructional support, with a particular emphasis on the question of whether structural learning, structural teaching can transform the situation in those countries that are furthest behind in reading outcomes. So, but that link between leadership and digital transformation brings me to our work on the Pacific. And as I tried to show in my previous slide, over the last few years we have been trying to cover all different regions of the world, in addition to the global report, with extra editions that cover regions where this theme has particular resonance. And the Pacific was the last region, but the one we're particularly proud to have been able to cover, thanks to our partnership with the Commonwealth of Learning. Our work was based on a range of background papers and a survey of key informers and consultations. And it looked at the case of the Pacific through the lens of its regional education framework, known as PAC-REF, which has 4 priorities. And these 4 priorities, we could see both the strength that technology can bring, but also the challenges. Quality and relevance is the first pillar of the framework, and yet, despite what we know technology can deliver, we also know that the countries in the Pacific are challenged by the diversity, especially linguistic diversity, and yet the digital content that tends to be commonly available does not quite respond to that diversity. The second is learning pathways, the second pillar of the Pacific framework. We know that there is a vast potential for open and distance learning and demand for it in a remote area like the Pacific. We know that the University of South Pacific has, through such mechanisms, managed to increase enrollment a lot in recent years. But we also know that there are disparities in access to infrastructure, and particularly vast ones in countries like Kiribati. The third pillar is student outcomes and well-being. We know the challenges that technology is bringing right now, even to countries in the Pacific, and the need for regulations that always lag behind the developments and the challenges that students are facing in terms of privacy, safety, and well-being. And finally, the teaching profession, which is supposed to carry these reforms forward, and yet them too, as the Pilna study that covers the Pacific countries shows that the vast majority of teachers in primary schools do not have access to devices that they could use. So these are the opportunities and challenges. And the report has, in this very vast area of education, 4 recommendations to make, because we cannot cover every single technology, but we can offer or invite policymakers to ask 4 questions. And these are in this compass that you see here with the 4 keys of our keyboard, and I'm going to take you quickly through them. The first question is the use of education technology, of a particular technology, appropriate? That means it answers the question the minister posed. Is it improving learning outcomes? And that is often not necessarily the case. It's important to reform the curricula, to target the teaching of basic skills that are suited to the tools that we have in order to improve learning. Now, we know, of course, that Australia and New Zealand have important lessons to share with the Pacific countries. Your Te Kura program has been catering to students in remote areas and has been adopted in the Cook Islands, in Niue and Tokelau. The second element to make education technology appropriate is to involve teachers in the design, monitoring and evaluation. Papua New Guinea and Vanuatu have tried to integrate ICT into teacher education so that teachers can participate. And there are also good examples in the report from Samoa and the Solomon Islands, which have provided professional development for teachers in order to, again, be active participants in shaping technology and its use in education. And solutions need to be made fit for purpose and fit to the context. That's often not the case, but one good example is the Pacific e-learning program, which has tried to use relevant examples from the daily realities of students and learners in the Cook Islands, in Samoa, and the Solomon Islands and Vanuatu with respect to the teaching of science. The second recommendation is to make the use of technology in education equitable. That's another often neglected dimension. Often we don't necessarily choose the most marginalized when we introduce technology in education. And sometimes we forget that even simple technologies, that we don't need to have the most advanced ones, are the ones that are most effective. In Papua New Guinea, thousands of schools received it pre-recorded lessons on TV, which were broadcast in schools, and supported by in-person teachers. So here, there was a particular problem, the weak capacity of rural teachers, and the use of a very simple technology that really helped make a difference. Assistive technologies can make a huge change for learners with disabilities, and yet, throughout the Pacific, they're used at a very low level. Small exceptions, the Cook Islands and Palau, where their use has been more generalized. The second, of course, problem and challenge which goes beyond education but affects education centrally is the poor coordination in the investment that exists and takes place in internet connectivity. We know the geopolitics there. There are examples of cables that have made a difference, but still many constraints to overcome, regulatory, the geopolitical I just mentioned, financial and institutional. And finally, we need to promote digital public goods in education to lower the costs for learners. Samoa has digitized most of its textbooks and made them publicly available. Papua New Guinea also has started digitizing its English language textbooks, but more needs to be done considering the linguistic diversity. The third recommendation is about scaling. Often, many of our interventions are quite small, and we expect that through the initial experiment, we will actually get to where we want, but that requires many more steps. Countries find it very difficult to evaluate technology because it changes so rapidly, and the capacity countries have to do that is very limited. So there are some examples in the Pacific, like the Center for Flexible Learning and PACFOLD, where the Commonwealth of Learning is involved, but more is needed because countries do not have the resources to know which direction they should be taking. And maybe pooling the limited resources is the way forward. The second is that we tend to jump on investing without necessarily thinking the long-term consequences. Technology investment is only the first step, the capital investment, but then we need to factor in the maintenance and the development of the content that's very costly. There are a lot of examples where hardware investments were made and they just didn't succeed because all these parameters were not taken into account. And finally, we need to have transparency on public spending in terms of agreement. That's an essential element throughout, of course, government investment, but that's particularly the case in the case of education technology. Finally, technology needs to be sustainable. Sustainable is not only financial, but also social and environmental. When we think of digital skills, we should not think of it only as a technical skill. In fact, it's people with the best reading skills that are better able to navigate the internet. We don't need necessarily to think of digital skills as something highly sophisticated. We need to use frameworks for digital literacy that are much broader in scope. Fiji has done that, putting digital literacy in the scope of citizenship, which is quite similar to what, let's say, the French territories in the Pacific do, which follow the European Union DIGCOM framework that takes into account these broad 5 areas that are listed on this slide. We should not forget to protect learners' human rights, well-being, safety, and privacy. There are many examples already in the Pacific from the richer countries where screen time is far too high for young children, and that's is, of course, a major concern for their health. But also we have very few countries that have started investing or implementing laws and policies on privacy in education. Last but not least, we should not forget the material and energy implications of digital technology. That's something that's, when we talk about climate change and all these issues, we should not forget about them when we enter this debate on education, because it matters there as well. So, to conclude, the technology on our terms theme and hashtag of this report reminds us that we need to keep learners' best interests at the center of a framework based on human rights. That means we need to focus on learning outcomes and not, as we tend to, unfortunately, just digital inputs. At the end of the day, digital technology should not be a substitute to, but a complement for human interaction. And that's the core message of the report that this regional edition also highlights. And with that, I took far too much time, but I would like to thank you very much for your attention.
Manos, that was absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much. Fantastic material in there, and much of it of huge interest to educators in New Zealand. So thank you very much. Now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Professor Gail Gillon. And Gail is an internationally recognised expert in education, speech language therapy and children's literacy development. And where are you, Gail? Yeah, there you go. And she has a deep, deep commitment to improving literacy outcomes for all learners, particularly those from diverse and disadvantaged backgrounds. And I think, as the Minister hinted, many, many achievements here. Gail, as a founding director of the Child Wellbeing Research Institute at the University of Canterbury, she's led groundbreaking research that bridges the gap between education, health and social equity, and ensuring that evidence-based approaches inform policy and practice. So Gail, we're delighted to hear from you, and we're absolutely thrilled that you are one of our new commissioners. So all yours.
Thank you. Oh, kia ora. Thank you for that very warm introduction. And it is indeed a privilege to be able to offer some reflections on these incredible reports that are such a valuable resource for us. So congratulations, Manos, to you and your team for the work that goes into these amazing reports. And yes, I am indeed very passionate advocate for UNESCO's key priority in really enhancing the power of education to foster sustainable and more equitable outcomes, and obviously a more peaceful world. So very pleased to be in this new role as one of the national commissioners. So I'd like to just offer a few reflections on some of the reports. Education, of course, is at the core of much of our work here in New Zealand for the National Commission. and particularly relevant to our program of activities that relate to ensuring resilient, regenerative and sustainable communities that we have within the Commission. And part of our role is to represent New Zealand to UNESCO and also to learn from the UNESCO global activities and connections and resources available and see how we can apply those to benefit us here in New Zealand. So it's a wonderful opportunity to delve into these reports and see how we reflect in the reports and also what we can learn from them. In terms of leadership, we know how important effective leadership is to foster success at all levels within our education system. And as Manos highlighted, we have to focus our leadership on learning. I like that tagline, lead for learning, because we need to be streamlining the leadership, the academic and the education administration so our leaders can really focus on learning. But the report also reminds us that we need to focus that leadership on learning within the broader goals of ensuring really high quality teaching, of ensuring equitable, culturally responsive and inclusive practices. And our New Zealand principals and our early childhood teachers are acknowledged in this report for their promotion of culturally responsive practices. The activities of integrating Te Reo Māori and Pacific languages into our classroom routines and daily way of working, our early childhood centres creating dedicated spaces, creating an environment that's inclusive for our families from diverse cultural and linguistic backgrounds. These are examples in the report that are highlighted for the rest of the world to have as ways of helping to create more inclusive education environments that leaders have a big part to play in that work. We've heard about the 4 key priorities of really effective leaderships, setting expectations that's based on valid and reliable data. And that's really important, that the data we are gathering is valid and reliable and appropriate for us within our New Zealand context. Fostering collaboration, developing our people, focusing on learning. And developing our people is a really important one. To build really effective and resilient education systems, we absolutely must invest in our leadership development at every stage. Looking after the well-being of our current leaders, but also our aspiring leaders, and thinking of that journey all the way through. How are we really developing leaders so that they can sustain in those positions, they can bring stability to our educational context, and they can lead for really inspiring and successful education outcomes. The report also emphasises that leadership is not just about transformational change, but it's also about sustaining excellence. Sustaining excellence. And I think we have an amazing example here in New Zealand with this structured literacy approach, ensuring right from the start of school that every child is being taught to read and to write, using really evidence-based, high-quality teaching strategies and techniques is incredibly important. We know the amazing protective power of early literacy success. It's the strongest predictor of later literacy success, which is associated with educational achievement and the health and the well-being of our young people. So it is an incredible strategy that our Minister is leading to really invest in ensuring quality teaching for literacy and, of course, for numeracy and right across the curriculum. But we must make sure that is sustained, that excellent practice is sustained within our schools over time. And within our Better Start Literacy approach that I know some of our leaders here in Wellington have had such an important role in sustaining that practice. We've been trialling this for about the last 5 years in partnership with our Ministry of Education. And what we see from our data that we have now on tens of thousands of children is that we see that sustained practice over time with good leadership and that collaborative leadership, our literacy leaders, our literacy specialists, our deputy principals, as well as our principals, that collaborative team of leaders really working hard for that systems level change. And we see that makes an incredible difference to uplifting and accelerating the oral language, the reading and the writing skills of our young people. So I do mihi to the leaders here today that are working hard every day in literacy learning to really get that change sustained in practice. Investing in leadership takes significant investment at all levels, as we mentioned. Quite challenging in the report, I thought, was around thinking of leadership right from initial teacher education and thinking about the qualities that we need to be building in even our beginning teachers, to think of those skills of resilience, of innovation, and giving them a pathway into leadership. And we know also, of course, that leadership is critically important for educational outcomes. I think the Minister referred to the effects of leadership on children's learning, that the research in the report shows us that the effectiveness of principals' leadership ranks second to the influence of teachers in children's learning outcomes. That's incredible. And the studies that looked at that collaborative leadership, from principals to middle school leaders to literacy leaders, when that's combined, that has a really powerful effect on children's achievement. It accounts for about 27% of the variance in their learning outcomes, which is almost a third of their variance is accounted for through effective leadership strategies. So really important for that investment to be supporting leaders all the way through with that distributed leadership model. And in leadership, of course, going into the second report is critically important for our technologies in education. This is a really interesting report focused here on the Pacific. And of course, higher education has been the area that has adopted technology the most. I was amazed to read in the report that in 2021, over 220 million students are learning in open access online mediums. Some regions have replaced campuses with digital platforms. It's a huge shift in our way of accessing learning. But as we've also heard, we've got to, we know about some of the benefits. It absolutely can break down barriers to learning for those in some remote and rural areas, or who have other challenges that prevent them from coming into face-to-face learning environments. We know that technology can enhance engagement, can individualise learning for us, can foster collaboration, and importantly, it can streamline academic and education administration to free up our leaders for the task of leading for learning. But, and the but comes with capital letters, because we also know that despite its tremendous potential for technology, there are risks, and we need strong research evidence as to the added benefits of technologies and also how to mitigate those risks. And one of the risks as countries are bringing on more screens, more digital devices, is of course the time children spend on devices. And this is rapidly accelerating. One of our colleagues at the University of Canterbury in our Child Wellbeing Research Institute, Dr. Megan Garth, has been leading research here around, with the Growing Up in New Zealand study, around screen time use in New Zealand. And quite alarmingly, our 8-year-olds, on average, are spending up to 4 hours outside of school time on devices and screens, which is twice the recommended. The recommended for over 5 is no more than 2 hours from our New Zealand Ministry of Health. And of course, the recommended for under 2s is 0 time on screens. And we also see the evidence that young babies and young children under 2 who are being exposed to screens and technologies are actually coming into school with lower levels of oral language and literacy. No surprise, I see a lot of heads nodding. So we've got some concerns, but we want technology, we want the benefits of technology, we want it to be that bridge to more equitable and successful outcomes. But to get there, we really have to work collaboratively. We have to invest in research to understand how best to use technologies. We need to ensure that the technologies our children are exposed to are culturally relevant and culturally appropriate, because we need to be fostering children's cultural identity, their language, and if they're on devices that are got imported overseas, all sorts of different screens, programs online that they can be exposed to, how is that supporting their cultural identity? And of course we need to help support their safety and ensure their well-being through those devices. But we, as I say, we want to embrace the technologies. We've got to do it in a way that's responsible, and this is going to take a collaborative effort. So it's fantastic work that UNESCO is doing, really bringing our attention to some of these issues and how we can work forward. So just to conclude, this investment that we need in our leaders, research, data-driven practices, really high-quality, sustained teaching excellence that our leaders drive is absolutely a top priority for us. And we're seeing that happening right now here in New Zealand with some significant changes that are coming through. And our leaders are a key part of that, so we want to help support them and invest in them. Because, of course, education remains a great beacon of hope and progress to a much more prosperous, equitable and peaceful world. Kia ora.
Gail, thank you so much for your incredible insights and very pertinent comments and that expertise that you bring to bear. Every statement, pretty much, I could see a whole thread of exploration that we could do. And the correlation between the data that Manos put up on lower levels of achievement and, you brought in the use of certain technologies, including social media. Interesting correlation, possibly. Right, so it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Peter Scott, who's the President of the Commonwealth of Learning, a globally respected leader in education and lifelong learning. He's dedicated his career to expanding access to quality education through open, distance and technology-enhanced learning, with the idea that more learners can benefit from equitable education opportunities. And as President of the COL, or the Commonwealth of Learning, he leads efforts to support innovative, scalable and sustainable learning solutions that empower individuals and communities. And Peter, I saw your Commonwealth of Learning branding all over Manos's slides, so clearly there's a wonderful partnership going on there. So maybe you can come and share some insights with us. Please welcome Peter Scott.
That's great, thank you. Can we go back to the previous slide? I think it's much better than looking at my face. You can look at the real me here, but it's about these reports. So I really only need 2 minutes because Manos has said everything that needs to be said. But I was kindly invited to say a few words because the Pacific Report is a joint report. We reflect as a team and friends that you could be very gloomy looking at the world today. You could look at many of the global educational trends as ones which reflect a relatively negative view of a world that is mired in chronic problems that, if they're not getting worse, they don't appear to be getting better. Huge pools of inequity, particularly around things like out-of-school children. So when you look at that sort of reporting and you say, sure, okay, that's bad, but things are being done about it. The world is changing, and yeah, it could be changing for the worse. But some things in it could be changing for the better.
And these two reports, I think, represent that important picture. One is about people and the people leadership represented in our leaders. And that's incredibly important worldwide, and we're doing a lot to try to understand that and to do better. And the other is that technology is not an option, and it is changing our landscape. You don't get a choice. Our world has always been technological, but you have to use it as a tool in your terms. So in this work, when we were working with Manos on the work that is very well funded by New Zealand in the Pacific, we took case studies of some of the things that New Zealand and our island partners are working on. And I will note that the call is not 200 countries, it's 56 nations. 11 of them are in this region of our members, and we work very closely with all of them, and they all contribute to us as an intergovernmental organisation. But it is New Zealand MFAT that has funded some of the work that you will read in the nice green report. And what we were looking for there was case studies where we can show that there is a bit of a transformation and a bit of a change in and amongst a world where there is chronic inequity. There are things that are happening in the Pacific supported by this country that are making a difference. So I would commend this green report to you to look under the hood of where technology is actually making a change, where we can see a difference to the chronic inequity that has been holding us back for very many years, and where the Pacific itself, as a collection of countries that are whānau and that work together really, really well, is a model for the rest of the world. So we take 11 from 56 countries, go to the Caribbean, and this is an excellent model for case studies of change to move the Caribbean. Go to the Indian Ocean, same thing. Look at Africa. Actually, there are models from here that the Pacific is leading on, with your help, that will help us to change that landscape. So I think whilst it is important to recognize the challenges of technology and to use the tools in the terms that allow us to regulate, to control, to manage, and to be clear about what we're trying to achieve, don't be frightened of the technology. It's really, really important, and we can make it help. And this great report, which I'm very happy to commend to you, with the excellent support of MFAT and all of the nations of the Pacific, is showing the way forward. Thank you.
So, Peter, thank you very much for the work that the Commonwealth of Learning is doing. It's incredibly important. It's wonderful to see that focus on technology and distance learning and access is continuing through the decades. And I know, I'm pretty sure everybody here appreciates hugely the collaboration on the initiatives in the Pacific. Thank you also for introducing a very positive note. Technology is not an option, but use it on your terms, as a very, very pertinent reminder. So thank you very much for that. Now, I'm conscious that we blew our timing out the window, but honestly, the privilege of having the Minister and our speakers here was just so great. I just decided let's hear what they had to say, and it was rich indeed. But I don't know how the Minister is placed, but I think the other speakers are definitely captive for a little bit. So we're happy to do a few tiny Q&A, Minister. Oh, good. So perhaps can I ask all the speakers to come to the forwards again as a panel? And we won't go too long because we have some drinks outside, but honestly, the opportunity to have the calibre of this lineup here is something else. So let's make the most of it. And I'm conscious that people may have questions for the Minister and also our other speakers. So I can see you. So if you want to raise your hand, and I will save time, I will try and repeat your question if I can. And anybody got any questions for anyone in the audience, in the panel, rather? Over there. And, there is a mic coming. Just say quickly who you are, where you're from, please.
Yep. Kia ora. I'm Eva Hartshorn-Sanders. I'm the Director of Policy and Advocacy at Philanthropy New Zealand. I guess this is a question for all of you maybe, but I just wondered what examples of philanthropy supporting those sorts of outcomes you've highlighted in the reports that you've seen in other countries, and what sort of levers to help support that as well.
Okay. What I might do is I might take just a few to give people a chance to be thinking about it. So, all right. Anybody else? Yes.
Kia ora, ko Rachel Essentau ko Ingawa, National Librarian. I've got a question about the role of libraries in the work of both UNESCO but also education more broadly and literacy in particular. So just interested in your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody got anything for the Minister? And right at the end, at the back of the room.
Well, not for the Minister, but kia ora koutou. My name is Sheree Chufalo-Whanga, academic at Victoria University. I particularly loved the last speaker who talked about how there are great examples of the Pacific. How do we keep that or share that message more broadly, particularly through Aotearoa?
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. And I'll also invite Minister Stanford if she has any reflections, but there's one in there for you, Minister, around libraries, I suspect. Right, let's take it from the top. Anybody want to handle the philanthropy examples? Manos. It's on. Just keep talking.
Thank you. So on philanthropy, we approach the issue in two ways in the report on leadership. First, of course, philanthropy can play a role leading change, helping direct societies in particular directions. Now, the big question, of course, is how that is done. Sometimes some philanthropies have perhaps overwhelming role due to their resourcing. And I think the report always supports those philanthropic organizations that work with others and engage and consult without imposing, but posing the right questions for societies to engage with. But we also highlight the role that some philanthropies have played in elevating the role of leadership, because it has not always been a popular issue in policy debates, and so there are examples. We work with one of them, Global School Leaders, is an NGO philanthropic organization that has actually tried to engage networks of people interested in leadership in different regions, in Latin America, in Africa, now in South Asia and Southeast Asia. So plenty to say about that, but
Thank you. Peter?
So I'm very happy to do one that covers libraries and philanthropy, a double whammy. So we're an intergovernmental organisation, so governments pay for us, right? So governments all contribute. All the Pacific governments contribute to our organisation. But we do also get philanthropic funding too. So I'll give you an example. One of the major funders of open education in the world is the Hewlett Foundation, based in the US. And they give us unrestricted funding to do things like build huge libraries of open education resources. Every single country nation in the Pacific has its own open access repository. We support that and maintain it through the use of philanthropic funds and with the support of our governments. We manage those resources, and those countries create resources, build capacity for their teachers and leaders to master the technologies to create things that are open and shareable and jointly with others. And stuff flows from the Caribbean into, you'd be surprised how relevant learning in the Caribbean is to learning in the Pacific. and how relevant some of the problems of the Indian Ocean are to the problems of the Pacific, and how excellence in some of the great institutions in the Pacific can help each other and the world. So philanthropy is wonderful. Leveraged correctly, it helps to build massive resources like libraries of open and shareable resources, and those are transformational.
Thank you. Minister.
From my perspective, the philanthropic community is so incredibly important. If I think about some of the policy initiatives that we have implemented and will continue to implement, so many of those started because of philanthropic funding. And if I think about the Dunedin study with Engage and Enrich, for example, incredible research showing us the value of early oral language and social emotional regulation in ECE. And the value of philanthropy to take that research and then pilot it, to then hand it to someone like me and say, you can do this at scale, and look at the improvements, and they've had social impact reports and all sorts done. Now, as a politician, that is extraordinarily valuable. That rich data, and then actually having it in place somewhere that we can use that data to say, actually, we can take it, we can scale it, because that's the goal of every philanthropist, is to take an idea, have it done somewhere, and then picked up by government and scaled. I think the one thing that I would say is that I don't know about other countries, but in this country we don't do particularly well of connecting education to the philanthropic community. And when I say that, I mean we don't, but I'm intending to sit down with them and say, here are my goals. Here is the inner workings of our thinking and where we want to go and what we're trying to achieve, to help those philanthropists know where to invest and put money, because they know that they're tied in with the government's goals. And so I think there's something in that can be improved in that relationship, where we can work much more closely together. Because I've heard from so many philanthropists who come up to me and say, we're doing some things, but we don't know if it's on the right track, and we don't know if it's going to have the intended outcomes of you picking up the policy and running with it, because we're all flying a bit blind. And so there's certainly there is a need for us to work much more closely together in that regard.
Sorry, we haven't...
I'm up for it.
Thank you. So libraries, we have our Chief Librarian, National Library in the room. Great question. I'm going to just take the UNESCO bit and go across over here for education. You asked about the role of libraries in the work of UNESCO and in education. Joined at the hip, of course. UNESCO is really about how, it's the knowledge platform for exchange of knowledge and learning as a way of fostering international cooperation on those particular domains. So libraries are, of course, repositories of knowledge. They're the means for access to knowledge and learning. They are often first movers in the different forms that the information can take and be transmitted. So libraries and their networks are absolutely prominent in the work programs of UNESCO around the world, and they are key stakeholders, agents of change, partners, you name it. You're in the heart of the CI sector, which once upon a time in a previous world I had the pleasure of working in. So it was a wonderful question, thank you. On education and libraries, though, I'll look to our wonderful panel. Gail.
Oh, kia ora. Well, we've been very privileged to have a wonderful relationship with our National Library and the work we're doing in structured literacy around ensuring that all schools have access to really quality children's storybooks right from 5 years of age, because not all books are created equal. And when you're working with structured literacy approaches that really want explicit development of vocabulary, for example, of good quality story structure, the types of books are really important. And so through our relationship with our National Library here, we're able to direct schools to books that are really ideally suited to this type of explicit teaching and vocabulary, lovely quality storybooks that have rich and interesting words so that we can extend and explicitly teach those words, that have a good structure, aren't too long for our little 5-year-olds. We've got to keep them engaged. And that is a huge resource for us as a country. And I know our schools have really appreciated that they can order a set of beautiful quality storybooks and they get sent to them on loan from the library and they're all ready to go. And that has really reduced, it's opened up for all schools to have access to those really quality children's stories books because, of course, digital technology is fun and exciting, but nothing replaces a beautiful, well-illustrated, fantastic story. And so the library has been instrumental in helping us select those books as well. So kia ora.
Thank you. Manos?
Yeah, maybe one thing, just for those of you who are not familiar with the report, you heard about the leadership report. But the leadership and what I covered in a very, very short time is only half of the report. The other half discusses international progress on towards the international goals. Adult literacy is one of those 10 targets of SDG 4, our global goal in education. And under that, we have a section, for example, on family literacy programs, in which, of course, libraries also play a very important role, which is highlighted in the report with examples from different countries. And I think it was also wonderful to hear in spending time with this great combination. I think I would like also to mention that I really appreciate that the National Commission brought together the Ministry of Education and here the colleagues from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And we heard today about the very interesting collaboration of how the Ministry of Education has supported the preparation of and production of books for children from Pacific languages in recent years, and how important lessons can be drawn about the use of these languages and these materials in the Pacific Islands, and making them available to children will be really very important in the years to come if we are to address the really significant literacy challenges for that group.
Thank you. And there's a third, thank you, Manos, a third question. There's some great inspiring examples of what's happening in the Pacific, and Peter, that you alluded to, and the question was sort of how do we share that and shape it so that we can both I think what I was hearing, that so that we can shape that and follow it, we can share it, we can replicate it, we can scale it. A more generic, same idea, generic question is that given these reports are global in scope, and given we have our Minister of Education here, how do you take this advice and guidance and so on, and adapt findings to align with local priorities? So if we can start with the Pacific and how you take some of those ideas and make it happen in New Zealand and elsewhere. Any reflections from anyone? Peter?
Go first.
Thank you. Well, interestingly, I mean, we do some amazing things in the Pacific with IT. I was interested when I looked at the report around the learnings, though, about what not to do, and I see that in New Zealand around introducing technologies quickly and then not thinking about what happens after that. And I know that some of the things I'm concerned about are the effects of technology on writing, for example. You know, we all jumped in really quickly to typing. You won't need to write in the future without thinking of, well, what is the link between writing and reading? And I'm aware that Professor Gail Gillon knows a lot more about this than I do. But from my limited experience and knowledge, that link between being able to handwrite and automatise the sound of the letter as you're writing it, which helps you to learn to read, is so important. And so if you throw out handwriting and focus on typing, you have these unintended consequences. And it's a similar thing for using a calculator to do your times tables. We don't need to automatise that. We'll have a calculator in the future. But actually, automation of basic facts is very important for cognitive load when you are trying to solve complex problems later in life. And so there are lots of learnings there. But certainly in the Pacific, the benefits that it has brought is interesting if you think about a New Zealand context, whereby we don't always have specialist teachers in schools. Especially in our kura kaupapa, our Māori immersion schools, where quite often it's very hard to find a chemistry teacher who also speaks te reo Māori. And so how do you use technology like we're doing in the Pacific here in New Zealand to get that expert teaching across different regions where we're finding it hard to have find a STEM teacher, for example, up in Northland, or that te reo teacher in chemistry, and how do we then have use information technology and technology solutions to make sure that every child has access to that expert teacher. And that's probably some of the learnings that we can take out of the Pacific, because they're probably doing it and we could do it here in New Zealand. And I know I've already been in communications with kura kaupapa about how we can fund that, because they're already funding it themselves, and how do we build it out. But I certainly think in the mainstream education sector as well, how we use technology when we do have a shortage of expert teachers in specific areas is probably one of the key learnings for me.
Right. So I'm conscious that I'm holding people.
Standing in the way of a drink.
Yeah, I am standing. Yeah, I am standing in the way of the drink. So that's the last one. There you go. And you need to have the mic because we are being streamed. I hope we're still being streamed.
Linda Webb, a music education leader and STEAM advocate rather than STEM.
Yeah.
I noticed in the reports that there was one little line and quite low down the voice of the students in the reports. And I know the research I'm involved in at present, the voice of the students is absolutely critical. So I just throw that back to you. I think it was a statistic that was quite low, and I just wondered what your response to that is. Thank you.
That's a great final question, actually. The voice of the students, where does it feature in your research methodology?
Actually, we're quite in a privileged position. In 2022, there was a major summit called by the UN Secretary General, called the Transforming Education Summit, which sort of took stock of where things are going in the implementation of this global agenda. And one of the 7 global initiatives ended up in a youth declaration that called for more engagement of youth and students in education. And that's enabled us, through a decision that was taken by the high-level steering committee for SDG 4, to research this further. So right now we have unrolled a survey of governments all over the world, where we have asked them to, first of all, explain whether through formal policy they guarantee the rights of young people to contribute when a new law or policy is being implemented. And the deadline was just last week, but we have extended a little bit because we have already seen a very good participation and actually rather enthusiastic participation from governments. And we are following this now with a survey that will be administered to at least 5 youth and student organizations that will then provide another perspective into this question. So for the first time, we will combine this information in our youth edition, and we will be able to highlight examples of how youth and students are really engaged. That has not happened before, and I think it could be quite influential. The UN Youth Office has shown interest in using these results at the next UN General Assembly. Of course, participation and engagement in education policy making is very specific. We know that we need youth voice in many different ways. The report also covers examples of the range through which students in schools are engaged in school boards and the extent to which they have an opportunity to participate. Now there's a big, though, knowledge based on that, of where that works, under what circumstances, how important it is for essentially civic education and democratic management of schools. The new contribution will be this, the results of this survey that we're really looking forward to sharing with the rest of the world.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Manos. So before we move to our closing karakia, I want to sincere thank you on all our behalves to the Minister Stanford and to our wonderful panellists, and for two of them for hiking all this distance to come and help us understand the power and the richness of the research that's being done in global education. I really, we are all very grateful for the inspiring contributions that each of you have brought. And I was writing furiously. You'll be grateful that I'm not going to sum up, but there's so many great comments that have been made that we can take forward. So I hope we will continue the conversation, and there are so many threads in that material that went up there in those slides, and that each presenter has mentioned that we could follow through on and do something quite amazing with. So thank you, each and every one, and thank you, Minister Stanford, for making the time to join us. And Manos, Gail, Peter, please show your appreciation. So tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, and we have our closing karakia, I hope. Yes, we have. We have. Gail, do you want to lead that, please?
Una hia ki te uri tapanui. Kia wātea, kia mama, te nākau, te tina, te wairua, i te ara takata. Koia rā I runga. Whakahaere aki ki runga. Kia tina, hui e, tāhe ki e. Kia ora, everyone.
Thank you. We have some refreshments out in the foyer. We would love to have you join us and mingle. If you can do that, it would be fabulous for you to stay on. Thank you very much.
Oh, well done.